Hello, welcome back to the Desk Corner and welcome to a new video. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I'm going to be doing a portrait in colored pencil today. I have worked on the eyes a little bit already and I thought it would be fun to take you guys along with me as I start working on the skin and show you just exactly how I do that. But first, I have some very exciting news. Finally launched my Patreon where I'm going to be posting a lot of real-time videos and bonus content. I have a couple of posts already up there right now, and if you're interested in joining or checking it out, I'm going to leave the link in the description down below. There is a video on there that's available for anybody to watch just kind of as a sample video. So go check that out. As you guys can see, I have my Polychromos pencils out right now. I've been using them to work on the eyes and the areas around the eyes. And I think I'm going to use my Luminance pencils more to work on the actual skin. So I'm going to go ahead and do some color picking. I did want to show you guys this new pencil sharpener that I got. I had a recommendation from somebody on my Discord server. This is a great pencil sharpener. It's the Faber Castell one. It has a couple of different sharpening holes. This one I use for the Polychromos. There's two on this side. One is for graphite. The bigger one is for the jumbo graphite. I've been using it for Luminance and Derwent, Lightfast, and other pencils that have thicker barrels because they don't fit into this one. Only the Polychromos and smaller would fit into this one. It is very sharp without the point being too super long. I'm starting around the eyes where the inner creases of the eyes are and some of the creases above the eyelid and areas like that. And I'm using my Polychromos for some of these fine details because they just stay so sharp and they're easy to keep sharp, and I love how much detail I can get with them. I am working on Strathmore mixed media paper if you're wondering about the texture of the paper. I just showed you guys my Luminance pencils. I picked out the 3 burnt ochre colors and I'm using those all together. They work so nicely together and I love that Luminance groups colors like this to make it less difficult for us and also so that we can create really nice smooth gradients when working with something like skin. I have not worked on skin with colored pencils in a really long time, admittedly, so I was having way too much fun with this portrait. And I'm just using a mix of my Luminance and my Polychromos depending on either color or if I'm working on a detailed area or not. So with skin, I tend to work in more like small circular motions, sometimes larger circular motions depending on the area, but for a small concentrated area like under the eye here, I'm working more in small circular motions, and I just like to create a smooth blend without there being any sort of pencil marks going in one direction or another. I don't want any linear pencil marks. That's what we're trying to avoid when we're working on something smooth like skin. There will be some of the texture of the paper showing through. It will be less and less as I add more layers, but because I'm using a mixed media paper, it does show through a bit. So depending on your personal preference, you could choose a paper with less tooth. I would suggest against using a paper that is too smooth because personally I've had trouble adding multiple layers onto paper that is ultra smooth, especially with colored pencil when you have to add so many layers, unlike something like graphite or charcoal. If you guys are interested in resources like the reference photo that I'm using, I'll have that linked down below, as well as the colors that I'm using. It's hard to keep track of those in this video, so I'm going to just link down all the colors in the description box below so that you guys can see it if you're interested in that. But it's a mix of Polychromos and Luminance, as I mentioned before. So I'm working a little on the iris here. I think this is one of my cool gray colors that I'm using. And I like to be very careful with irises because you don't want there to be too harsh of an outline. You want it to be a little bit fuzzy, but you still want there to be a clear area where the iris ends and the white of the eye begins, if that makes sense, without creating any kind of harsh line. I do realize I haven't added shadow to the white of the eye yet. That is something I have to go in and do later. Adding shadow to the white of the eye gives it more depth and makes it actually look like it's rounded and not just flat. And in reality, with the way that light strikes, the white of the eye is never actually going to be white. The thing about colored pencil, and especially when working on a portrait with skin, is that you have to keep layering and layering for the portrait to come to life. So my first layers are going to be a little bit lacking, and then as I build upon them, you can see that the skin tone becomes more rich, like it did underneath the eye in this particular area that I'm working on here. Oh, you just saw me go in with my kneaded eraser too and erase some of the sketch on the bottom of the face near the ear, as I would like to go in and work on that. There's a fuzzy or blurry line or area in the reference photo here, so I'm going to create that very carefully by adding layer upon layer lightly without creating any kind of harsh pencil strokes. I'm using kind of tight circular motions here as I'm coloring those blurred out areas so that I get blunt edges and not sharp edges, which is very important. I'm going to jump around a little bit too. That's my style of working, so hopefully it doesn't cause anybody to be confused or taken out of the video, but I'm going to try to include tips wherever I see fit, even though I'm kind of jumping around from one area to another. You'll notice when I'm working on a broad area of skin like this, I'm just using the side of my pencil to color rather than the tip of my pencil. If I work on an area that's more detailed or concentrated, I'll probably use the tip of my pencil and sharpen my pencil more, just so that I make sure I stay within the area I'm supposed to stay within. But when I'm working on an area like the cheek, for example, I want all the lines to blend together so there aren't any lines in the final product. I want to create a smooth surface, and using the side of the pencil really helps to create that sort of smooth look without any linear pencil strokes. What you do see, of course, is the tooth or texture of the paper, which will depend and vary on which paper you are using. I believe the color I'm using here is burnt ochre 40 or 50%, whichever one it is. I believe it's 50%. And the lighter one, burnt ochre 10%, I'll use a little bit less in some of the highlighted areas as well. It works great as a base layer too. I want to be careful with that full burnt ochre 100%. That one is going to be darker, and I don't want to accidentally darken up certain areas. The girl's skin that I'm working on in this portrait is more on the fair side. She does have a lot of freckles, which will be fun to add at the end as well. But since her skin is on the fair side and the lighting is just harsh, it casts a lot of orange and red looking shadows. Besides that, her skin is quite light, so I don't want to darken up the highlighted or lighter areas of this photo too much. In a moment, you'll see me pull out my Sepia, my burnt Umber, and my burnt Sienna from my Polychromos collection. I knew that I was going to need some browns for the shadowed areas, but I forgot to pick them out earlier. I didn't realize I would work on so much of the skin area earlier, so I went ahead and picked out some more browns to work with. I believe I also picked out some deeper reds because there's a very deep and harsh shadow on one side of her face cast by the lighting. Part of the reason I chose this reference photo to begin with, because I found it interesting because of that. And it also happens to cast a large shadow, or the light happens to cast a large shadow next to her nose as well, and that I thought would be fun to portray and try and get that looking like a real shadow. It's very red. It very much falls on the burnt red side, so I was using, I believe, natural russet from the Luminance set to portray that. And it was very, very fun for me to do. I forgot how much I love working with high contrast reference images. I'm using my burnt Umber from the Polychromos set to create some of those dark shadows underneath the eye and around the eye. On the right side of the face, or I guess the left side of her face, the right side of my paper. And this side of the face has a lot more shadows cast on it than the left side, which is really fun for me to try and create here. As you can see, I am using the point of my pencil when I'm working on eye details, and then when I go to work on something like, let's say, that cast shadow next to the nose, I start to use the side of my pencil a little bit more, and I try not to create any noticeable pencil lines. I want it to look rather blunt and soft around the edges and have it blend in nicely to the rest of the skin, which I will work on as we go on. You also might see me sometimes erasing with my Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Sometimes what happens is an area or a pencil catches onto an area of the paper and creates a darker streak than what the rest of the area that you've colored looks like. I'm sure this happens to you guys too, depending what paper you're using. But I hate when this happens, and I make sure that I go in and erase that random streak with my Tombow Mono Zero eraser whenever I find it. I'm working again on the side of the face where there is that red shadow. This was so much fun to work on, but I'm being very careful. Again, I don't want there to be too much definition or sharp lines. Some of the other features require a bit more definition or harshness in certain areas, but when working on the skin, it's a general rule that you don't do that. What I really love about the Luminance is how quickly I can work with them and how I can cover large areas in a lot less time than I would with Polychromos, for example. But even though they are very soft and easy to blend, they're not soft or waxy in the way that Prismacolors are, which for me, those pencils are a bit too soft and not really my taste. Luminance are firmer than Prismacolors for sure, and they still manage to be creamy and blend very well. So way to go, Luminance. I really like the Luminance pencils, and I love using them along with my Polychromos. I'm going in with the Polychromos burnt ochre again in some areas for the skin when I want a little more orange than what the Luminance burnt ochre 50% has to offer, as the 50% is very similar to the regular burnt ochre in the Polychromos set. It's actually interesting to see how different colors are between sets, but I am getting a little off track here. You can see that after multiple layers, the red shadow that's very harsh on the right side of the paper is starting to blend into the rest of the skin. And it's very easy to do this with Luminance pencils. They just blend beautifully without much effort being put into them or being put into it. Also, I thought it would be important to share that I haven't been using a huge amount of pressure with my pencil or burnishing. In case you were wondering how much pencil pressure I'm using light pressure to begin with and then adding more pressure as I go on. I'm starting to add a bit more pressure to the areas around the eyes where I want there to be an intense shadow. There are some very intense shadows around the eyes, and it makes them pop out and definitely stand out a lot against the rest of the face. That is one of my goals for this portrait, as well as to make the right side have as much contrast as possible while still looking realistic. So challenge accepted with that, you guys. I'm also filling in the area underneath the eyebrow and above the eye, which is a very small area here, but there is definitely that harsh red shadow coming up through there, and then there's kind of a highlight in the middle, I guess you could say. I'm not going to be working on the eyebrows in this particular video, but I will work up until the point where they start. There's also a shadow on the right side of the face next to the eye as well, and I started to get confused as to which area of the reference photo was where the hair started and which area was still that red shadow, because the hair is reddish orange as well. This entire picture is just going to be a vibe, very autumn fall, which is the season I'm going into soon. Anyways, it was at this point when I started to realize how odd this looked without any work done on the nose, so I decided to start working on the nose a little bit before I called it a day on this portrait. I went in with burnt umber from the Polychromos set just to add in where the nostrils are going to be. I just didn't want to lose that area. I'll go in and work on them again later, but I didn't want to lose that particular area, so I marked it in so I remember where it is when I continue working on it later. And then I went to work on the shadows, and there's a lot of contrast going on her nose, as to be expected. I'm guessing nobody is surprised at this point. I really like working on noses, as weird as that sounds. Yeah, that sounded weirder than I thought it would, but I do like working on noses. I find it interesting how the light reflects upon them and how it looks in different lightings, different angles. Just like the rest of the portrait, there's a lot of those burnt reds and oranges. Of course, there's not as much shadow on the left side, so that's where I start to lighten up what I'm doing here. But this is about all for today's video. I wanted to walk you guys through how I was working on the beginning stages of shading this portrait, and there will be more videos to come. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Comment down below if you enjoyed it, and also check out my Patreon and my other channel if you would like to, and thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys in the next one, of course. Bye!